All right. Hmm. Now, okay. All right. This one's working now. We'll see how long that continues. And the day the earth tipped over. Now, we've just been in the near past, back in the 60s, when they first discovered the Black Knight, the satellite orbiting thousands of miles up. This is chapter 1 in Jonathan Gray's book. Jonathan Gray's book. And let me, The Dead Man's Secrets. Dead Man's Secrets. Sam stormed outside. Anna was such a sucker for cranks. That guy in the news interview, a world wipeout, what rot. I decided I would use, by the way, this book that Jonathan Gray sent me to do today's show. And I also tuned on YouTube and watched a little bit of a series put on Netflix about a worldwide catastrophe when Yellowstone blew. And the disaster he's talking about, the worldwide flood here, which is more than a biblical legend, is a pretty accurate. This is the one fictional part of this. Why couldn't Anna be practical like he was? Sam had built up this market garden from scratch. 16,000 pineapples, the best in the South Polar Basin. And that clever little blackmail, well, Anna didn't know about that, but they'd soon be rich. The Hoover bus whirred onto busy Ada Avenue and disgorged its load outside the Green Pyramid Hotel. Sam's favorite bar was ablaze with color. Inside, at a corner table, sat an acquaintance from an electronics plant. Sam still fumed at Anna's gullibility. He poured out his frustration over a beer. So I told her, now, if a worldwide flood were imminent, surely our top scientists would say so. When has nature let us down? Since time has been so smooth. Natural disasters, pure fantasy. They just can't happen. They do, drawled his companion. When this mug is empty, that's a natural disaster. Sam winced at the flippancy of that remark and proceeded. Anna said, the end's coming, Mal. Have you heard anything so naive? That this entire planet, equitable and warm from pole to pole, will suddenly change under a flood of water? Mel peered over his flask. How? Oh, some stupid prophecy about sheets of water crashing from the sky and erupting out of the ground. Religious nonsense, Sam snorted. Perhaps so, responded Maul, but, you know, pal, there's enough water up there and down there. He gestured with his flask. What do you mean? Was Sam hearing right? Was Maul a fruitcase too? Just this, Sam. You know why we have such an excellent climate? Why we have vegetation in such a lavish exuberance, so wonderfully teeming with animal life? It's that vapor canopy high above the planet. It filters out harmful cosmic rays and keeps our climate just right. But there's oceans of waters up there and lots more in the underground basins. If something were to disturb them, Sam cut in, rubbish. I'll believe it when the first drops fall. Look, most of the Earth's surface is not sea but land, watered since time began, and quite adequately, I might say, by nothing but the gentle morning mist. It's reliable, I tell you. What can go wrong? Maybe if the Earth keels over, quit Maul, as I'm about to. Sam bit his tongue. It was useless trying to extract sense from his companion tonight. He glanced up at the televiewer. The news was on, with police scanners now in 70% of home arrests for dissent had risen to 600 per week. A new planet had been detected beyond Pluto. Hoodlums with a laser gun had decapitated a man on his way home. Apparently, he disturbed them during a pack rape. Today, a single bomb disintegrated an entire city on the equator, frightening all the violence almost out of control. Sam felt sick. Some cool night air is what he needed. Sam pushed through the sound-activated doors and into the street. It was soothing, calm, fresh. He felt better. Leaflets from peace demonstrators littered the pavement. Sam watched bemused as one flitted down the street and up the side of a building, the half-completed Jared building already towering 300 feet into the darkness. It was partly his, thanks to the photos and safe deposit. Blackmailing the corporation chief had been easy. The man could ill afford a fraud scandal. Sam smiled. With his stake in the Jared Corporation, he was set for life. And Anna, that silly woman, he wanted her so much it hurt. Next week was the wedding, a lifetime with her. Suddenly the pavement rocked. Sam was hurled against a guardrail. He looked up. Massive buildings were swaying. A loud burst of noise cracked the sky. He stretched out his hand to steady himself and felt them. Spots! He fumbled for his neck phone, his face ash, and something like this was occurring on the final night of the antediluvian era, if we are to believe later traditions, that is. As for the worldwide greenhouse environment, geology would one day attest to it as well as to its sudden demise. Traditions would later describe survivors of the deluge who were like gods, that is. They were members of a superior civilization which ceased to exist after the Great Flood. Egyptian records was contend that the reign of the gods before the first dynasty was one of superior and miraculous powers. After the deluge, the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Quiche Indians of Guatemala, would record. The first race of men before the flood possessed all the knowledge. They studied the four quarters of the heavens and the round surface of the earth. Understood in this light, even Greek mythology begins to make some sense. We see it as the recollection of a degenerate race of a mighty, vast, and highly civilized empire which in the remote past covered the world. Pause for reflection. Can we possibly imagine that all of the people of all the continents independently invented such a story? Did they all speak of an original golden age by chance without foundation? Indeed, I am tempted to ask, if man evolved from the beast, then why is it that there exists a long tradition of a golden age instead of that of a savage past? Can anyone explain that? Even where there was a lack of writing and conditions of savagery imposed by catastrophe, the same memory of the golden age was passed from mouth to ear. You may want to ask at this point, can we really place much credence in ancient legends? Surprisingly, a great deal. Too often, I'm afraid, we've been prone to dismiss folklore and the mythology out of hand, but Is this not unscientific, especially since traditions have often led us to discover physical remains? Legends are usually based on a core of fact. Presently, William Prescott, the great Americanologist, reminds us a nation may pass away and leave only the memory of its existence, but the stories of science it has gathered up will endure forever. You see, folklore is a fossil of history. It preserves history in the guise of colorful tales. Far from being a collection of fables, it is a recital of actual past events, even though from generation to generation some facts have become distorted or forgotten. Professor I.A. Efimov of the Soviet Union cautions that historians must pay more respect to ancient traditions and folklore. He accuses Western scientists of snobbishness and rejecting the tales of the common people. We must face it. Legends are usually based on a core of fact. Consider the legend of Troy. No scholar took the Iliad or the Odyssey of Homer as history, but Schillmann, putting faith in it, discovered the mythical city of Troy. The Iliad spoke of a cup decorated with doves which Odysseus used in a shaft. Schillmann found that 3,600-year-old cup. Herodotus told a fabulous story of a distant country where griffins guarded a golden treasure. The land, Ataya or Kinsan, has now been found, together with the ancient gold mines and decorations from a high culture prominently displaying the griffin. A vague myth is seen to be a fact. Mexican Indian legends spoke of a sacred well of sacrifice into which maidens and jewelry were hurled. Historians dismissed it as a mere tale until the well at Chichen Itza was discovered in the 19th century. More than any document, the Bible was assailed as a collection of fanciful myths, yet to the embarrassment of the critics, archaeological discoveries prove time and again that the fabled cities, mythical persons, and impossible events were true and reliably reported in every detail. Indeed, the Bible can now be regarded as the most accurate and trustworthy source of history we possess. Let's talk about our ancestral memory of the Golden Era. If we are to credit the collective testimony of all ancient races, man's early history was truly an incredible one. It was a golden age of advanced civilization, of original giants who had superior intelligence and technology. This appears to have been a universal truth known to everyone in ancient times. Sacred records affirm that at the very beginning, soon after the fall from paradise, men possessed extraordinary mental abilities. Beginning with the raw earth, they mastered a high level of civilization in just the first 6 generations of their existence. In that short time, they were able to build cities, play complex musical instruments, and smelt metals. Indeed, with their scientific complexes, these earliest men, it seems, were no fools. We might well wonder to what degree they further developed and refined this technology in the final few centuries before the flood struck. Were the miracles of science as common as they are now? Perfectly valid question, I think. Imagine, if you can, paved rainbow cities whose houses of crystal reflected every spectral hue. We're talking about air travel, computers, and plastic. Did you know that when Alexander Graham Bell gave us the telephone, it had been done before? The old devices have been reinvented, he observed. Yep, that's exactly what Bell said. In fact, the question was pressed further by the eminent British scientist Frederick Soddy, winner of the Nobel Prize in Physics He wondered whether ancients might not have attained our present knowledge, but with a power hitherto unmastered by us. And physical remains also. Where did Bell and Sadi get their information? Quite possibly from some musty old records. Nevertheless, our quest is not based on ancient texts and reports, but on accepted scientific discoveries. There are recently discovered artifacts that cannot be dismissed, namely objects of metal sitting in museums, unquestionably made in the ancient world, that would have required very advanced technology to produce, a technology not to be repeated until our day. The weight of evidence grows daily, evidence that all major secrets of modern technology were known and forgotten long ago. Evidence that early men did create a society that surpassed us and ours in all aspects of development. The entire world is really a dead man's tomb, a treasure hunter's paradise. As we open the coffin, suspense builds. Since we are lifting the lid on a lost technology which almost smacks of science fiction, we come face to face with absurdities such as brain transplants, colonies on Mars, and invisible men, and we wonder what next. Admittedly, such concepts almost strain credibility. We are tempted to ask, could the ancients have really advanced so far? It may help to consider our own age. As recently as 100 years ago, were not most of today's inventions totally unknown, even unbelievable? Since then, the spawning has been rapid and sudden. What is more, the present age of basic discoveries is hardly at an end. It is forecast that just 15 years hence our present accumulated knowledge will double. Do you grasp what that means? How then can one possibly conceive of the state of knowledge attained by the antediluvians before the deluge struck? And we're going to talk about the deluge, and that a world war was raging at that time. In the 34th century BC, a catastrophe of unimaginable magnitude intervened, causing the world to wobble and ripping the crust of the earth to shreds. A great flood swept the planet. November 17, 3398 BC. That day was probably, like most others, temperate, balmy. In one latitude, millions were dining, entertaining, relaxing. Precisely at 8 p.m., the earth gave an enormous shudder. Prodded by an outside force, the planet tilted on its axis, and amidst lightning and the worst thunder ever heard by man, the pristine vapor canopy began to disintegrate. A floodgate of rain was released upon the earth. There could be no general rising of water. Cosmic forces of horrific violence came unleashed. With a dreadful shock, large land masses with their populations slipped into the sea. The surface of the entire globe became a giant maelstrom, in which continents and seas were churned up together. Attended by a screaming hurricane, tidal waves of 6,000 feet swept toward the poles. A blanket of lava and asphyxiating gases extinguished all life. The cataclysm wiped the mother of civilization from the face of the earth and consigned its products to a watery grave forever. Not only were the antediluvian people buried, but their technological achievements were destroyed, including all forms of machinery and construction. It's quite possible that areas that were the most densely populated were submerged by the sea or buried under thousands of feet of debris. It's been scientifically estimated that over 75% of the Earth's surface is sedimentary in nature, extending as in India to 60,000 feet deep. Indeed, the earth, torn and twisted and shaking, was not to quiet down for centuries. With no less than 3,000 volcanoes in eruption, a dense cloud of dust shrouded the earth, blocking out sun and distorting the climate for hundreds of years. Thus began the Ice Age. Of the human race, a mere handful remained. Indeed, their survival was in every sense a miracle. Forewarned, they salvaged what records they might, a compilation of knowledge which in its due course would be imported to their descendants. Now, for the sake of the listener who is unfamiliar with this event, it should be stressed that the global flood catastrophe is one of the key facts of all history. Not only is there massive geological evidence, it has left an indelible impression upon the memory of the entire human race. An analysis of some 600 individual flood traditions reveals a widespread concurrence on essential points. That there was a prior corruption of mankind, a flood warning unheeded by the masses, a survival vessel, preservation of up to 8 people with representative animal life, the sending forth of a bird to determine the suitability for re-emerging land, significance in the rainbow, descent from a mountain, and the repopulation of the whole earth from a single group of survivors. Especially remarkable is the persistence of the biblical name Noah, and this is particularly so when you consider the ultimate language differences between people, the extreme local distortions which develop into flood legends, yet the name survived virtually unchanged in such isolated places as Hawaii, where he was called Nuwu, and the Sudan, Nuh, and China, Nuwah, and the Amazon region, Noah, Noa, Phasia, No, and among the Hottentots, No and Noah, Noh. Think about this. Did each of these nations independently concoct the same name for its flood-surviving ancestor, or did these widely separated peoples revert back to the same family of survivors? The Table of Nations in Genesis 10 records the general dispersion of Noah's descendants and lists names, offers clues to their history and dwelling place. It contends that all nations of the earth have sprung from the family of Noah. Professor W.F. Albright, internationally recognized archaeological authority, describes it as an astonishingly accurate document which shows such remarkable modern understanding of the ethnic and linguistic situation in the modern world, in spite of all its complexity, that scholars have never failed to be impressed with the author's knowledge of the subject. So in a nutshell, there's good reason to believe after the deluge, mankind sprang from a single group of people. Chapters 2 to 6 will confirm that these were not idiots, imbeciles, or illiterates. They were in a civilized state with an enormous cultural heritage before they separated. In Chapter 5, traces their ultimate slide into oblivion, while Chapter 7 and 9 raise 3 challenging questions that need to be answered. Thus prepared, we shall more intelligently evaluate clues salvaged from the ancient world in an exercise to which a major portion of this work is devoted. Quick, jump, shrieked Ed. Get in, will you? His jeep door was flung open. I glanced back hurriedly. A fierce-eyed mob was closing the gap. It had happened so fast. Camera strung, I was exploring a fertility temple near Calcutta. To stumble upon a sacrificial blood rite was, to put it mildly, unexpected. Some hawk-eyed watcher raised the alarm, and in seconds I was the focus of an inflamed pursuit. Foremost, a devotee was now so close you could hear him panting. A quick sideward glance, the glint of a raised knife, persuasion enough. I leapt into the moving vehicle. It screeched into top gear and flew. An hours later, my heart still pounded madly, but the excitement had shifted. 4 bizarre coincidences were startling enough, but a 5th, a world-shaking event soon to break, affecting us all. I had been pondering some old prophecies which declared the end of modern civilization to be already known. The prophecies claimed credibility on the basis of a certain past event. Naturally, before one can begin to consider such a prophecy seriously, it must at least be established that the ancient event to which they are linked did in fact occur. I knew Ed Savage to be a bulldog of an archaeologist. Even so, his announcement startled me to no end. That evening I quizzed him over vegetable curry and iced mango juice. Putting it simply, he began, the commonly held view that we came up from savage Stone Age beginnings, it was a slow but steady development to civilization. He wiped down from his fingers. Well, naturally, I expected on-site investigation of the very first crystals to verify this fact, but what really emerged was something quite different. The coincidence in each case was simply this: all cultures begin suddenly and fully developed. A long preliminary period is not supported by archaeology. Before cities on Earth, there was nothing, I tell you, but a clean slate. Are you telling me the evidence proves no transition whatsoever between the ancient civilizations and primitive forebears? Precisely. They did not rise to their peak. They were at their peak from the beginning. Hogwash, I snapped. There has to be some trial and error, refinement, evolution. Edgar went on. At first I could not believe it either, but there was one pattern: the sudden appearance of civilizations worldwide. 5 coincidences are one pattern, you might call it. Meaning? I looked at him. Well, there was Egypt after 3000 BC. Egypt sprang into existence, fully developed, that is, without transition from a primitive state with a fantastic ready-made high society. Great cities, enormous temples. Pyramids of overwhelming size, colossal statues with tremendous expressive power, luxurious tunnels and tombs, splendid streets flanked by magnificent sculptures, perfect drainage system, decimal point to the very start, a ready-made writing already perfected, well-established naming system in which each pharaoh had as many as 5 names. Society already developed into specialist classes, an army, a civil service hierarchy minutely organized, a court exhibiting all the indications of a well-defined precedence and form. Edgar stirred his dish. At the remotest period of which there are records, I tell you that Egypt showed a level of civilization which is inexplicable. Sounds crazy, I know, but it's a fact. I emptied my glass without tasting it, poured another. What if? Go on, said Edgar. Oh, forget it. I need a stroll in the night air. Outside was cold black, almost eerie stillness. Above, the Milky Way floated brilliantly close. A gentle, warm breeze brushed my face. My mind wafted back. Inexplicable, he said. Inexplicable, unless... Suddenly it flashed. That's it, I heard myself shouting, glad no one could hear me. Yes, it is inexplicable unless Egypt received her heritage basically from somewhere else. Egypt came from a clearly established civilization. Triumphantly, I strode back inside. Ed politely heard me out. So she got it from someone else, eh? The archaeologist ran a finger under his collar and swallowed. He cleared his throat, tried again. Just who was Egypt's invisible mother? I have to admit it stopped me for a moment. It wasn't only Egypt, he went on. Take a look at Samaria. The appearance around 3000 BC of Sumerian civilization was likewise sudden, unexpected, out of nowhere. H. Frankfurt called it astonishing. Pierre Amet Elam termed it extraordinary. A parrot summer described it as a flame which blazed up suddenly, so suddenly. Leo Oppenheim, Ancient Mesopotamia, stressed the astonishingly short period the civilization had arisen. Joseph Campbell, The Mask of God, summed it up this way: with stunning abruptness there appeared in this little Sumerian mud garden the whole cultural syndrome which has been constituted the germinal unit of all the high civilizations of the world. Ed crumbled his napkin on his plate. There's your second coincidence. Well, Hosanna Daro, Ed stated. They were key centers of the Indus Valley civilization. They also appear to have sprung up suddenly with no clear-cut traces of having evolved from primitive beginnings. Your third coincidence. The archaeologist opened his mouth and closed again. Perhaps I've got an overwrought imagination, he said, but there's one possibility I must explore. Do you think some explosive, unknown event might lie behind all this? You see, the Maya of Central America are in it, too. The Mayan calendar goes back approximately the same time, 3000 BC, and sure enough, at the outset of Mayan culture, their script was already perfect. Another bombshell. I rose and leaned against the plaster wall, studying the evidence sign. 4 very odd coincidences. You said there were 5. Indeed, they are. The megalith builders of northwest Europe appeared at precisely the same time. The advancements they demonstrated were identical, that is. The simultaneous discovery of Pythagorean triangles, a precise calendar, a true compass bearing far north, knowledge of the movement of celestial bodies, possibly including the knowledge that the world was round, and a minutely accurate system of measurement. No disputing the facts, just wish I had an answer. The very next day, Edgar was Nepal bound. One thing sure, our next meeting would be memorable. That night I couldn't sleep. My head was throbbing. The mystery deepened. How was all this possible? So many instant civilizations. I took a map, encircled those suddenly appearing ready-made cultures, and stared at them. A common origin. Was there any connection between them? All right, let me check my chat room here. All right, we are self-spinning my copy here. All right, I'm going to do a ad for my friend Russell. You need to know about that. Stay with me while I warm up the coffee.
Hello, friends. This is RJ, the Mighty Phoenix. Friends, if you're a business owner and need capital to sustain or accentuate your business, and if you've been in business for 2 years or more, and your credit scores are low as 500, I can help you. Credit scores don't pay back with money that you borrow. Credit scores are only weapons being used against you in the war on small business. You pay back money that you borrow with business monies earned. So if you have 6 recent bank statements and your business is active, and as I said, you've been in business for over 2 years, I can get you money within 8 business days. Contact me at R, as in Russell, J as in James, P as in Peter, P as in Peter again, A as in Arthur, P as in Peter again, A as in Arthur, at yahoo.com. That's R, J, T, P, A, P, A at yahoo.com. And if you're not in business and you need to earn extra cash and you don't want to go out and work for someone who's going to take advantage of you, or you don't want to spend the money to gas and get paid minimum wage, you can work with me, not for me, and earn big commissions. And all you need to do is place ads on the computer, on the internet, on Craigslist, on Backpage, on other sites in the financial section. Only 15 minutes a day. Again, contact me at rjppapa@yahoo.com. Leave your cell phone number. I'll get back to you within 24 hours. And we'll discuss the issue. I can help you. Again, rjppapa@yahoo.com. Have a great day, folks.
All right. Alright, see here, that one's working, that one's working. And let's get back here to archaeologist here, Jonathan Gray. Ask about all of these cults of Samaria, Egypt, even possibly Turkey, the Byzantine Empire. He says, I began to sift every available isolated piece of information. Over the next few months, the search would lead through scores of countries. Meanwhile, back of my mind, the thought kept surfacing. What of the prophecy? Something told me there was a connection, though I did not know where. As for a possible link between the instant civilization, 8 clues emerged. Symbols and hieroglyphics, identical worldwide, bore the marks of a common heritage. Everywhere, the swastika, the snake, and the sun combinations, as well as numerous specialized and intricate glyphs, were repeated with no chance of coincidence. Likewise, similar systems of writing were in use, again, all over the globe, even on isolated islands. This was striking. And languages had similarities. The older these were, the more they resembled each other. Practically all languages have connections through both vocabulary and construction, and almost every language or many words containing similar root words or combinations beyond what mere chance would allow. Take, for instance, the names of the constellations. I found these were substantially the same, whether in Mexico, Africa, or Polynesia. The calendars of Egypt and faraway Peru both had 18 months of 20 days, with the 5-day holiday at year's end. I took into account the great similarities in buildings, not only in construction, but in astronomical alignment. Sphinxes in Egypt, and Yucatan, pyramids on every continent and on remote islands, monoliths and stone circles also worldwide, often quarried elsewhere in the world. I was struck by similarity even as to original purpose. The Tower of Babel, first built according to Josephus, first century Jewish historian, to provide shelter should another deluge destroy the earth. And regarding the Toltec pyramids, the Mexican chronicler states, after men had multiplied, they erected a very high Zacuali, which is today a tower of great height, in order to take refuge should the second world be destroyed. Now I ask you, without a common source, why would the purpose be identical in Babylon and Mexico? Customs, again, were similar, as in burial, mummification, circumcision, or in binding babies' heads to produce an elongated skull. That's the Mayan, the Incas, Celts, Egyptians, and Basque did that. Another thing we should talk about in a future time is the hundreds of these skeletons and these heads being found. The number 7, the forms of religious observance bore striking similarities. And number 8, finally, I added to the list of worldwide traditions of early history, traditions of a garden of delight, a golden age, a golden flood, one original language, a tower whose language where sudden language confusion resulted in dispersal, clearly bore the marks of a common source. Of one thing I was certain, the origins of cultures that were so different and so widely dispersed could not wholly be explained by borrowing and imitation. The Russian poet Valery Brusov seemed to express it well. As the basis of the older cultures of mankind, we must look for a single influence. We must look back beyond antiquity for an X, for a still unknown cultural world that set the engine we know in motion. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, and Romans were all teachers, but who were our teachers' teachers? My attention was riveted. Here were several fully developed cultures, apparently related, suddenly appearing out of nowhere. How does one deal with such a discovery? I must confess, my curiosity was exploding. One more search was imperative. This time I had to track down the common source of any footprints leading to these cultures. And they've got pictures of certain scripts from ancient North American rock art, and from Egypt, from China, from the Indus Valley, and Eastern Island, indicates a common origin. Fortunately, for 5,000 years, there were prints still visible enough to read. The evidence fairly tumbled out. Language was the first clue. It was soon apparent that root words in almost every language had their origins in the Middle East. Written signs added to the evidence. A single system of sign used over an extensive area of the earth by Stone Age writers originated likewise in the Middle East. Anthropology provided another helpful clue. I discovered that the best reconstruction by anthropologists located man's point of origin close to the center of the Europe, Asia, Africa landmass. And archaeological finds clinched it. Agriculture had spread all over the world from where else but the Middle East highlands. Every instance, plants, shrubs, and fruit-bearing trees, basic to survival and advancement, come out of the Middle East first. Botanical generic studies confirm archaeological finds and leave no doubt. There it was, our beginnings in the Middle East highlands. I suggested to Ed Savage when next we met, the first thing he did was throw me a tricky question. So tell me, why did agriculture begin in this difficult arc of mountains and highlands? Doesn't that make you wonder? Was it not why was it not begun on the fertile, easily cultivated plains and valleys? It was a natural enough question. During my search, I had found other scholars expressing surprise at this most odd discovery. Have you ever considered a worldwide deluge, he suggested. You don't mean Noah's flood, I snorted. Just that, clipped Ed. It does shed some light on things. John, don't you see, survivors of such a deluge and an event most scholars have overlooked would still be in the mountains, the lowlands where we are not yet dry enough following the global flood. And did you know that biblical sources not only point to Ararat, Armenia, as the landing place of the flood survivors, but state they landed in the mountains? Ed unfolded a world map. I elbowed it over to the table. He pointed out the pertinent areas. Artifacts uncovered suggest that settled communities extend from the Americas in the west to Thailand in the east by 3000 BC, and overlaying that is a general pattern of high culture from Spain to Pakistan. I stared, somewhat intrigued, at the map. Armenia, the dispersion point, lay almost precisely in the middle. And, of course, the Armenians were massacred, too, in our century. I would later discover that other researchers had reached a similar conclusion, as says Howells. If we look, first of all, for the part of the world in which which was the hothouse of the races, we can only make one choice. All the visible footsteps lead away from Asia. Could this be the key to your 5 coincidences? I asked Ed. No, I hardly think so. How? I recited to Ed the succession of discoveries made since our last meeting. Each of the civilizations appeared suddenly, already fully developed. A connection existed between them. The footprints led back to the Middle East mountains, and the archaeologists thought for a minute theirs narrowed, working through all the angles. Gradually a smile formed on those weathered lips. By gum, man, you've hit it. The only thing that could explain their high level of civilization. Those nations got their heritage basically from the world that was wiped out by the deluge. They continued where the generation of the biblical Noah left off. These flood survivors must have encountered sufficient knowledge of the antediluvian era to give a rapid start to new cultures that sprang up out of nowhere soon after. And the timing, he snapped his fingers. 400 years, all it needed. The oldest civilizations appear just long enough after the deluge for a population density to support culture. Come on. Of course, we could hardly claim to be the first. Sir Leonard Woolley notched up a similar observation years before. It was confidently expected that the world-held view of a gradual development could be proved, but the whole evidence had been to the contrary. Indeed, it has grown to such proportions where we contact the most ancient civilizations that we find the peak was reached soon after the flood. The sudden appearance of civilization itself, a memorial to history's one great catastrophe. More importantly, the flood is a historical event of tremendous testimonial importance to modern man. In the days of Noah, the world has reached an unprecedented stage of material and technical progress. And then, as now, skepticism, corruption, and violence abound. Ancient prophecies treat Noah and the flood as a prototype of the coming sudden and fearful end of the present world. For example, as the days of Noah were, so shall be the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and knew not until the flood came, and took eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage until that day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them away. So shall be the coming of the Son of Man. Matthew 24, 37, and 39. All other prophecies project that the first world perished by wilding, so the present world shall be destroyed by fire, and this second world, emerging from the deluge, stripped of its original glory, so shall emerge from the final fire a new world cleansed of evil, misery, and death, and restored to a perfection that has transcended even its original glory. Goes without saying that a small group of bewildered survivors from the deluge could hardly reproduce all the aspects of the pre-flood technology. Nevertheless, they would have bequeathed to their migrating descendants the information which they had personal or recorded knowledge. We know that the various earliest grains now show genetic evidence of sophisticated manipulation, that where they were already uniform and highly specialized immediately after the flood. In an attempt to reconstruct the antediluvian technology, the semblance of an integrated global civilization emerged in various parts of the world. Its achievements were astonishing in some spheres, penetrating knowledge which our science has scarcely begun to nudge. I found the results of my search under sea for confirmed and set by the fire, watching the coals from the earth. It was time to call the jigsaw team together. The year was 1799. The explorer Humboldt is paddling down the wild waters of the upper Orinoco. Formidable cliffs press upon him from both sides. Suddenly he glimpses, etched in the rock high above, an array of strange messages. Humboldt asks the natives what it means. Their reply is so startling he almost tips out of his canoe. Exactly 130 years later, Halil Edhem, director of the National Museums of Turkey, is cleaning out debris in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. He comes upon a dusty fragment of an old map. Examination shows it was compiled by Admiral Piri Reis in 1513 from portions of older maps. It was not until 1956, however, is the map subjected to serious analysis. The Hydrographic Office of the U.S. Navy issues a statement. What it reveals is almost unbelievable. 12 years earlier, Richard Nixon arrives in China. The cultural exchange is initiated with America. Interest is awakened in an old Chinese document, the Shanghai King, something which this old manuscript reveals is enough to knock you off your seat. All these seemingly unrelated events would come together with compelling force on October 17, 1984. On that day, I strolled into the foyer of Hong Kong Hotel for a rendezvous with the Jigsaw team. 5 men and 1 woman were converging with results of separate investigations into some very strange recent discoveries. Philip Corduroy was a cartographer. Denise Tagg was a linguist of no mean accomplishment. Paul Heron, a mathematician. Jacob Weishman, a keen student of prehistory. And Charlie Perch, a Scotland Yard trained detective who had turned to genealogy more than from passion than from pecuniary ambitions. His innate skepticism would render Perch and all the more valuable for critical analysis. As it turned out, we would spend 4 days in a tight little suite, advancing the papers each of us held of the jigsaw puzzle, and suddenly keying them together until a clearer picture developed, a picture which would prove more startling than any of us ever expected. Corduroy snapped over his briefcase. He withdrew a sheath of papers and squinted us over his spectacles. I want you to take a gander at these maps. There are 14 of them, all from the medieval and Renaissance period. Corduroy laid them on the table. This one is the Zeno map drawn in 1380. See how accurately it outlines the coast of Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Scotland, as well as the exact latitude and longitude of a certain number of islands. Just a minute, Phil, Heron cut in. The chronometer necessary to determine longitude was not invented until 1735. He's right, said Perch. That's why the readings of Columbus were so inaccurate. Nonetheless, the Zeno map is most accurate, insisted Corduroy, and notice the topography of Greenland is shown free of glaciers as it was prior to the Ice Age. Unknown rivers and mountains shown in the Zeno map have been located in probes of the French polar expedition of 1947 to 1949. See this paragraph? It shows the Chinese map on stone from 1137 formed on a special grid. And this is the Camarillo map of 1502, which used the same spherical grid. Mustag looked agitated. Listen, Phil, in the Middle Ages they thought the world was flat. Are you certain these are not modern fakes? No chance of mistake, I assure you, but when do you see this? He passed around another sheet. Here is the Zachi map of 1737. It shows Antarctica free of... Weissman interjected. Impossible, Phil. Antarctica's existence was not verified until 1819. Corduroy grinned. I expected that. Nonetheless, this map does show this continent completely free of ice to boot. Surprisingly, it is shown not as one continent, but two islands separated by a strait from the Ross to the Waddell Seas, a fact which was not established until the geophysical year 1968. Also shown are the islands in the mid-Atlantic range, now known to lie on the bottom of the ocean. And here's a map drawn in 1531 by Orontius Finus, in which the dimension of the Antarctica landmass correspond very closely to those on the very best modern maps. The maps indicate that the center of Antarctica was beginning to fill with ice when its sources were drawn. It shows rivers and fjords in Antarctica, which today are mile-thick glacier flow. And notice this Mercato chart of 1569. It depicts only the Antarctic coast left uncovered by glaciers. I really don't follow you, said Heron. The events you're describing are Ice Age, caveman era, and all that. Yet you admitted that these are a Renaissance map. Corduroy burst into laughter. That's right, but I think you'll agree these particular maps are infinitely superior to the regular maps made at that time. Now, I'll share a secret. You see, my friends, many of the medieval and Renaissance map makers admitted they were copying from resources whose origins were unknown. These maps are a scientific achievement surpassing the abilities of the navigators and map makers of the Renaissance, Middle Ages, the Arab world, or any ancient geographers. They are the product of an unknown people antedating recognized history. Now, here's a very exciting map. Copied in 1559, the Haji Ahmed map shows Antarctica and the Pacific coast of the United States of America with extreme accuracy. It also depicts the land bridge that once existed between Siberia and Alaska. The Andrei Berincasa map 1508 indicates that northern Europe was being covered by the Ice Age glaciers furthest advanced. And here is the Elinde Ben Zara map of 1487. Notice the remnants of glaciers in Britain and the detailed profiles of islands in the Mediterranean and Aegean seas. These islands are still there, but now underwater. The Hamy King chart, 1502, indicates northern Siberian rivers emptying into the Arctic Ocean, but which are all now under ice. It also shows glacier actions on the Baltic countries. What are today huge islands in the Southwest Asia are shown on the map, joined to land, which they once were. And you know what? The map even shows an ancient Suez Canal. Ptolemy's map of the north depicts a glacier sheet advancing across south-central Greenland. At the same time, it shows glaciers retreating from northern Germany and northern Sweden. Do you see? This could only have come from the findings of survey parties that tracked the area before, during, and after the Ice Age. The Orientius Finest map, its greatest area that Antarctica is shown too large, possibly a copyist mistake, though mountains and other details not discovered until 1958 were presented. Art. During the Ice Age, according to the evolutionary theory, humans were grunting savages. The Glorianus map, 1510, shows not only the exact line of the Atlantic coast of America from Canada to Tierra del Fuego, but also the whole length of the Pacific coast. The King James World Chart, 1502, shows the Sahara Desert as a fertile land with large lakes, rivers, and cities, which at a remote period it was. And then there's the Dulcet map of 1339, tracing from Ireland to the Don River of Eastern Europe. I tell you, the map shows precision beyond understanding, but there's one more, and it's a beauty. With a teasing twinkle, corduroy eyed us each, and turned, arose from his chair, and ambled toward the window. He stood gazing over the harbor to Victoria Peak with its skirt of skyscrapers. He stood there and said nothing. It was as though we were no longer with him. Come on, Phil, we're waiting. What's this trump of yours? Corduroy turned, still smirking, and rejoined us. He felt for something in his briefcase and plopped it on the table. This is the Piri Reis map of 1513. After its discovery, Captain Arlington H. Mallory, an American authority on cartography, asked the U.S. Hydrographic Office to examine it. The U.S. Navy, through Commander Larson, subsequently issued this statement. Corduroy took his notes and read to us. The Hydrographic Office of the Navy has verified an ancient chart. It's called the Piri Reis map. It goes back more than 5,000 years. It's so accurate, the only thing it couldn't explain it, that only one thing could explain it, a worldwide survey. The Hydrographic Office couldn't believe it either at first, but they not only proved the map genuine, but it's been used to correct errors in some present-day maps. I say if there was ever a treasure map, this is it. Just crammed with priceless gems. It tells the story of ancient coastlines as well as surprising exploits of our ancestors 5,000 years ago. And Piri Reis stated that his copy was a composite from 20 ancient maps. So let's explore it. South America and Africa in correct relative longitude and latitude. Not only were the Caribbean, Spanish, and African and South American coast in correct position relatively to each other, but even isolated areas like Cape Verde Island, the Azores, the Canary Islands, as well as topographies of the interiors, mountain ranges, peaks, rivers, plateaus, all were accurately positioned by longitude and latitude. The coastline of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica, the islands and bays of the depicted coastline are the same as they appear below the Antarctic ice sheets, as recently revealed by seismic echo soundings. Pictured in great detail are regions scarcely explored today. Indeed, including a mountain range that remained undiscovered until 1952. Interesting, the map shows two bays where modern seismic map showed land. However, the experts were asked to check their measurements. They found that the ancient map was correct after all. One thing was crystal clear. Someone had either mapped Antarctica before the ice cap covered the continent, or the ice-covered continent was mapped with very sophisticated instruments. The islands of Pines, Andros, San Salvador, Jamaica, the South Bay, this is the mouth of the Amazon, and the island of Morajo are correctly shaped and perfectly located in latitude and longitude. A major area appeared to be Greenland, shown as 3 islands, but during the International Geophysical Year, it was proved that this correctly represented the state of affairs about 3000 BC. Every mountain range in northern Canada and Alaska was recorded on the ancient maps, though some ranges which the U.S. Army Map Service did not have, including some ranges the U.S. Army Map Service did not have on their map, but the U.S. Army has since found them. The ancient source maps were drawn usually in circular grid based on spherical trigonometry with the focal points situated in Egypt. The copyist Piri Reis, unfamiliar with circular projection, shifted and spliced the original grid to compensate for the curvature. Any modern spheroid projection of a flat surface would cause the same distortions. Notice this in the accompanying comparison between Piri Reis and a modern map. Was this not compelling proof of the map's validity? Clearly, it came from an advanced ancient technology in its grid system, similar to air navigation maps. Even so, we cannot know how many times it was imperfectly copied. Now, listen to this. The Piri Reis map projection was based on an overestimate of 4.5 degrees of the circumference of the Earth. Only one geographer in the ancient world had made that overestimation, the Greek Eratosthenes. This can only mean one thing. The Greeks, who mapped according to Eratosthenes' circumference, had before them source maps which had been drawn without that area. Thus, the geographical knowledge on which a Piri Reis map is based ultimately originated not with the Greeks, but with an early people who possessed a more advanced science of map making than even the Greeks. That's brilliant, exclaimed Perch. Couldn't do better myself. What you're saying is that while Greece and Rome were developing new civilizations, the vestiges of an older one, seemingly worldwide scope, was vanishing. It left these maps, which are partially incomprehensible, so the later cartographers altered them. There's just one more thing. The evidence indicates that what we have here is only part of the original map project. Only part of an original world map. So here it is, evidence of science at an early epoch which is considered to have had none. Here are the physical elements of the amazing knowledge of a superculture long vanished. Now let me share this with you. As we leave this, this from the Rise of the Phoenix, from the cover. Thousands of years ago, the Earth was a different place. A race existed like no other. Theirs was a technology far ahead of the levels we know of today. They faced a disaster similar to that to which killed the dinosaurs. They sent their people out into space. Only a few brave souls stayed to help the less advanced inhabitants of the planet rebuild. They were genetically advanced men. almost immortal, incredibly powerful, telepathic, and able to manipulate matter with their minds. They were known as gods, angels, warriors, and demons among the survivors of our planet's close encounter with a galactic intruder. The legends and names of these beings are scattered throughout our history. Their power grew, all pervasive and hidden throughout modern times. Humanity was divided, controlled, and conquered by unseen hands. Today, the balance of power shifted into the hands of the most feared being in history. Meet Lucifer. I'm Clay Douglas. You can get that at shop.freeamerican.com. Thanks for listening. God bless you.